with national media. And also, it's a talking point he brings up in meetings with downtown businesses that are really upset about homelessness. But in Oregon, it's really just talk. Democrats in the state legislature have not embraced the idea. Republicans have introduced several bills that would expand who could be forced into treatment, but they're very much in the minority, and the bills are widely considered dead on arrival.
And why is that? Why is changing civil commitment such a non-starter in Oregon, where, like in California, they're honestly considering changing it?
I think a few things are still different here. First, the power to force a civil commitment in Oregon is very narrow, but maybe not quite as narrow as in California. So to take one of April's examples, in Oregon, a person who's not taking diabetes medication due to psychosis, that person could be successfully civilly committed. The legislature made a small change in 2015 that makes those cases a little easier to pursue. But there's real resistance to going further, and the biggest issue by far is treatment capacity for mental illness and substance use disorders. There's just limited political interest in forcing more people into treatment when the system can barely handle the patients it has right now.
Wait, what do you mean by that?
Well, Oregon is actually being sued by 3 of the largest hospital systems in the state over its failure to find placements for civilly committed patients. Because otherwise what happens is these patients are getting stuck in hospitals, sometimes for months. The state has 2 dedicated psychiatric hospitals with about 600 beds total. And over the last decade, more of those beds have been needed for people who are in county jails, who are too mentally ill to understand the charges against them. So the result is that most civilly committed patients are denied a bed at the state hospital. And then there's no community beds either, like sending someone to a nursing home or an adult foster home or a residential treatment facility. Those beds were in really short supply already. And then in Oregon, the pandemic just gutted those places. So in Portland, for example, one of the nursing homes that suffered one of the very first devastating COVID outbreaks was a place the state had been relying on to place psychiatric patients. 28 people died, and it was shut down permanently.
Well, April, is this capacity problem, this question of where do you even send people for treatment, is that a real concern in California too?
It's a huge concern and a huge problem. Opponents of these measures are pointing out we already don't have enough treatment beds or mental health clinicians for the folks who are voluntarily asking for treatment. And then proponents of the reforms are saying, well, passing these laws will put a spotlight on this and it will force a fix. So that remains to be seen. But the bigger capacity question here is really one of housing. Advocates will say homelessness is a problem caused by a lack of affordable housing, not mental illness. One doctor told me it's like musical chairs. If you have 9 chairs and 10 kids, the kid with a broken leg is going to be the one left without a chair. Well, if you don't have enough housing, it's folks with mental illness who are most likely to have trouble competing in a market of scarcity. UCSF Dr. Margot Kuchel told me the solution is more housing, not involuntary treatment.
If you try to fix the problem of homelessness by tinkering with the healthcare system, we're not going to get anywhere.
For the record, the same California lawmakers who are backing these new mental health reforms are also backing ways to increase the housing supply.
I mean, we're talking about 2 states where the rents have risen so much faster than people's incomes. And that is a gap that's worse for people who are living on disability income, which can include people with mental illnesses. Here in Oregon, the new governor, Tina Kotek, says housing is her top priority. And Oregon is trying something really novel. It's the first state in the nation that will use Medicaid money to pay for things like rental assistance. So starting next year, if you're homeless and Medicaid is paying for your substance use treatment or other mental health issue, it might also pay for your housing.
That was Amelia Temperton with Oregon Public Broadcasting and April Dombrowski with KQED in San Francisco. Both of them are part of NPR's health reporting partnership with Kaiser Health News. Thank you both so much.
Thanks so much. You're welcome.
This is NPR News.
For decades, Florida has been considered a swing state, but in the 2022 midterms, Republicans won big.
The damage is long-term, because for Democrats to recover, it'll probably take another generation.
What does this mean for Democrats in 2024? Next morning edition from NPR News.
We'll hear from the NSPR News team in just a few minutes at 5:32. I'm Elisa Tausi, and this is All Things Considered. We get support from CAL FIRE, reminding listeners that together Californians are reducing wildfire risk, from firefighters conducting prescribed fires to homeowners creating defensible space. For more information, preventwildfireca.org. The time is 5:29, and this is North State Public Radio.
It's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Adrian Florido.
And I'm Juana Summers. Author Colleen Oakley examines her grandmother's life and a possibly secret past.
I thought, what if my grandmother had kind of this other secret life that none of us in the family knew about, and it was just starting to come out toward the end of her life.
But first, the news.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. On Capitol Hill, members of a Senate banking committee held a hearing today to talk about the recent failures of several regional banks and the impacts those failures had on the financial systems. Silicon Valley Bank was sold yesterday after being briefly taken over by the government, and Signature Bank got money from several larger banks to keep operating. FDIC Chairman Martin Gruenberg told lawmakers today the situation merits serious attention.
The two bank failures demonstrate the implications that banks with assets over $100 billion can have for financial stability. The prudential regulation of these institutions merits serious attention, particularly for capital, liquidity, and interest rate risk.
Senator Tim Scott reiterated that Congress has to get to the bottom of what causes these collapses and charge those accountable.
By all accounts, this is a classic tale of negligence, and it started with the banks themselves.
Congress is also considering banning the popular social media app TikTok because of a perceived national security threat from China. TikTok is owned by the Chinese company ByteDance. As NPR's Domenico Montanaro tells us, a new NPR Marist poll shows most Americans are in favor of a ban.
57% support banning TikTok. 3/4 of the more than 1,300 respondents say TikTok does represent either a major or minor threat to national security. And that concern is bipartisan. 7 in 10 Democrats and 8 in 10 Republicans see it the same way, though Republicans are more likely to see TikTok as a major threat. There's a generational divide, though. Gen Z and millennials are split on whether they want to ban it and are far less likely to see the popular app as a national security threat. Domenico Montanaro, NPR News, Washington.
Stocks finished lower on Wall Street today. This is NPR.
For NSPR News, I'm Ken Duvall. All the rain that's been coming down is expected to bring about a bumper crop of mosquitoes as the weather heats up. Cap Radio's Rich Ibarra tells us flooded fields as well as our own backyard could be a breeding ground.
Dams are releasing water seepage is coming out of the levees, and acres of farmland are underwater here in the Central Valley. Aaron De Vincenzi is with the San Joaquin County Mosquito Control District. He says in 2017, the area had a similar wet year, and likely history will repeat itself and seeing a larger amount of mosquitoes.
It only takes a tablespoon of water for mosquitoes to develop, and we're asking people after the rains, look for these small amounts of water. It could be a bottle cap of water around someone's home.
De Vincenzi advises people to empty any containers around the home. He notes, too, that the mosquito that spreads West Nile virus is endemic to the state, and the mosquito season runs from April through the summer. In Stockton, Rich Ibarra, Cap Radio News.
Investigators would have more access to financial records when looking into alleged scams under a bill moving through the California State Legislature. Right now, they can retrieve records from 30 days before and 30 days after suspected illegal activity. Amanda Kirshner is with the bill sponsor, the County Welfare Directors Association. She says the new legislation would expand access for investigators to 90 days before and after an alleged incident.
So they can look at a greater number of financial documents as well as a long-term pattern over a greater amount of time. So they can look at some of these scams that are coming in for fraudulent transactions.
Robert Wilson is with the California Credit Union League.
Our credit unions are still a little concerned with the 90 days on both ends. It's going to increase the amount of records that can be pulled, and those timeframes have always been in place to ensure financial protection for individuals. So we look forward to conversations with the author and staff.
The bill's author is Elk Grove Democratic Assembly member Stephanie Lynn. It has passed the Assembly Privacy and Consumer Protection Committee and heads next to the Appropriations Committee. Stay tuned. We'll have an extended story about how one Chico group, Justice for Desmond Phillips, is continuing its efforts to promote social justice and support Phillips' family 6 years after he was killed by police officers responding to a mental health crisis. That's coming up in about 10 minutes. For NSPR News, I'm Ken DeVault.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Bank of America, offering access to resources and digital tools designed to help local to global companies make moves for their businesses. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/banking for business. And from Procter & Gamble, maker of ZzzQuil Pure Z's gummies, designed with melatonin for occasional sleeplessness to help people fall asleep naturally. Learn more at zzquil.com. And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Juana Summers in Washington.
And I'm Adrian Florido in Culver City, California. That was the sound of protesters in Mexico today calling for justice and also for changes after a deadly fire swept through a migrant processing center in Ciudad Juarez, just across the border from El Paso, Texas. More than 36 people died. Mexican officials said migrants inside the center caused the fire by igniting a mattress. But there is some skepticism about that from some who were outside waiting to hear if their family and friends survived. Member station KTEP's Angela Cocherga is in Ciudad Juarez near the burned center and joins us now. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Adrian.
Tell us what we know so far.
Well, I was outside that migrant processing center with the big burned out front door, and people were temporarily being held there before they were supposed to be either released to await immigration proceedings or deported. And the fire started last night around 10 p.m. our time, Mountain Time. There were about 100 people inside, and human rights workers at the scene of the vigil and protest said that at least 41 people had died in that fire. And a small crowd of migrants held a vigil with candles and flowers outside the gates of the center where they were demanding justice and answers. They want to know exactly what happened, and they also want word about who died in that fire.
What do we know about the migrants who were being held at this center?
Well, Mexican authorities have not given an exact breakdown of nationalities. Mexico's president during a morning press conference said most were Central Americans, but migrants I spoke to waiting outside the processing center said the friends or loved ones who they were looking for were mostly from Venezuela. And most had only been there a day or two after being rounded up on the streets of Juarez. And like Juliana Lopez, her friend had been taken into custody and had just been there overnight. And she was looking for that friend, very desperate to hear from her.
No nos han dicho absolutamente nada, si está vivo, está muerto, queremos saberlo, queremos justicia, mejor dicho, justicia lo que queremos nosotros, porque no somos animales.
Lopez says that she has not been able to get any information about whether her friend is dead or alive. And she wants justice because, as she put it, they are not animals. And she went on to say migrants also bleed and have beating hearts. And she's in Juarez with her husband and baby, hoping to cross into the U.S. to apply for asylum.
Well, we've heard that those being held at this center were frustrated by some of the conditions there. What were people telling you at the center today about this?
Well, people outside the migrants gathered there said they were frustrated with being locked up in that processing center. They were upset, the people who were there being held overnight, that they were going to be deported by Mexico. And migrants on the scene who had been inside said that it was often crowded and poorly ventilated. And they questioned why those on duty did not help migrants escape, but left them inside locked up. Officials have said the mattresses migrants set on fire in protest were blocking the door, and many of those inside suffered smoke inhalation. Firefighters finally arrived on the scene and had to break down another entrance to rescue the people inside.
What can you tell us, Angela, about how U.S. immigration policy has contributed to the situation that we're seeing along the border right now?
Well, U.S. asylum immigration policy, and especially a lack of ability to apply for asylum, has kept many migrants out of the U.S. and stuck in Mexico, often in very difficult and dangerous conditions, while waiting to see if they can get an appointment. And many are using that new CBP One app set up by the U.S. that's supposed to make it a much simpler and safer situation, but there's growing frustration heard from many people today about not being able to get an appointment through the app.
Now, U.S. officials have blamed poor Wi-Fi in Mexico and high demand for problems with that CBP-1 app.
Solicitamos la comparecencia del comisionado del Instituto Nacional de Migración.
You're hearing from Diana Rodriguez, who was one of the human rights workers leading that protest, and she was demanding, as were others, that Mexico's Migration Institute director resign, and they're calling for accountability. They want to know what happened, how so many people died, and they want more humane treatment and better policies to protect migrants.
That's Angela Cocheria of member station KTEP. Angela, thank you.
Thank you, Adrian.
Taiwan and China have long been locked in a fight for diplomatic recognition, and now Honduras has dealt Taiwan a blow, newly aligning itself with China. Taiwan's lost recognition from 9 countries in the last 8 years, in large part because China is aggressively courting the Asian island's few remaining partners. And NPR's Emily Fang is in Taipei and joins us now to explain. Welcome.
Hello.
So, Emily, what is behind this decision by Honduras to switch relations?
Well, if you ask Taiwan, it was all about money. Here's Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu. He's saying here to reporters that Honduras demanded what he called a high price to maintain relations, and Taiwan does not compete in checkbook diplomacy with China, is what he said. In total, Wu, the foreign minister, claims Honduras wanted $2.4 billion for a hospital, a dam, and help with paying back loans, a sum that Honduras, by the way, has confirmed. And Wu also alleged Beijing was giving high sums to Honduran officials to sway allegiances. China has denied all of this, but either way, this is still a really big blow for Taiwan because it fits a broader pattern in that China has been really successful in diplomatically isolating Taiwan, snatching away nearly half of its remaining partners in the last 8 years through a combination of economic incentives and lobbying, especially among island nations in the Pacific, but in this case in Central America.
Okay, give us some of the backstory here. Why do Beijing and Taipei compete so hard for these countries' recognition?